I'll never forget the sound. The mechanical whir of the chainsaw cutting through a century of life, followed by the earth-shaking crash that felt like my heart being ripped from my chest. I stood there in my pajamas at 7 a.m., watching strangers destroy the one thing that connected me to 4 generations of my family. The massive oak tree that had shaded my great-grandfather's first steps, witnessed my grandmother's wedding photos, and held my daughter's tire swing just weeks before it was gone. The HOA president, Margaret Thornfield, stood on the sidewalk with her clipboard, that satisfied smirk on her face that I'd grown to despise. She looked at me and said, "Should have complied with the notice, dear. This could have been avoided." That's when I realized this wasn't about tree maintenance or neighborhood aesthetics. This was personal. They thought they'd broken me. They thought they'd won. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. My name is Sarah, and I'm a 34-year-old graphic designer who thought she'd found paradise when I inherited my grandmother's house in Maplewood Estates 6 months earlier. It was supposed to be a fresh start after my divorce, a place where my 8-year-old daughter Emma and I could build new memories while honoring old ones. The house itself was modest, a 1950s ranch style with 3 bedrooms and a small front yard. But what made it special was the backyard, dominated by this magnificent white oak tree that my great-grandfather had planted as a sapling in 1923. This wasn't just any tree. It stood nearly 80 feet tall, with a trunk so wide that Emma and I couldn't wrap our arms around it even when we both tried. Together, its canopy stretched over half our backyard and part of our neighbors, creating this natural cathedral of green that made everything underneath feel magical. Grandmother Rose used to tell me stories about that tree, how she climbed it as a little girl during the Great Depression, how she and Grandpa carved their initials in its bark before he shipped off to World War II, how she'd hung a swing from its lowest branch for my mother and later for me. When Emma saw that same branch during our first week in the house, her eyes lit up. "Mommy, can we put a swing there too?" she asked, pointing up at the thick branch that had supported 3 generations of children. "Of course, sweetheart," I told her, not knowing I was making a promise I wouldn't be able to keep. The neighborhood seemed perfect at first. Maplewood Estates was one of those post-war developments where every house was slightly different but harmonious. Some Cape Cods, some ranches, some split levels, all nestled among mature trees and well-maintained lawns. The Homeowners Association had existed since the 1960s, according to the paperwork I'd signed, but it seemed like a typical setup. Keep your grass mowed. Don't paint your house neon green. Basic common sense stuff. I should have paid more attention to the fine print. My first interaction with the HOA was actually pleasant. A woman named Linda from the Welcome Committee stopped by with a basket of local restaurant menus and some homemade cookies. She was friendly, chatty, and seemed genuinely excited to have a young family on the block. "Oh, that oak tree is just gorgeous," she said, gazing up at it while Emma played on her new tire swing that I'd hung just days before. "Your grandmother was so proud of it. She used to show it off to everyone." "It's why I could never sell this place," I replied. "Emma's already claimed it as her own." Linda's smile flickered for just a moment, so briefly I almost missed it. "Well, just make sure you keep up with any maintenance. Margaret Thornfield, she's our HOA president. She's very thorough about these things." At the time, I thought she meant raking leaves or maybe trimming dead branches. I had no idea what was coming. The first letter arrived 3 weeks after we'd moved in. It was delivered in a crisp white envelope with the Maplewood Estates HOA letterhead addressed to me in formal block letters. I opened it while Emma was watching cartoons, expecting maybe a welcome packet or information about community events. Instead, I found a violation notice. "Dear homeowner," it began, "it has come to our attention that the oak tree located in the rear yard of your property at 47 Elm Street may pose a potential safety hazard to neighboring properties. Per Article 12, Section 4 of the Maplewood Estates covenants, conditions, and restrictions. All trees exceeding 25 feet in height must be inspected by a certified arborist and approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Please submit your compliance plan within 30 days or face fines beginning at $50 per day. I read it 3 times, certain I was missing something. 25 feet? That would eliminate half the trees in the neighborhood. I walked outside and looked. Around there were oak trees, maples, pines, all towering well above that arbitrary limit. Why was mine being singled out? I called the number on the letterhead and reached Margaret Thornfield directly. Her voice was crisp and businesslike, with the kind of authority that suggested she was used to being obeyed without question. "Miss Patterson," she said after I'd explained why I was calling. "The tree inspection requirement has been in place since 2019. Your grandmother was granted a grandfather clause due to her age and health, but that exemption doesn't transfer to new owners." "But the tree is perfectly healthy," I protested. "It's been here for 100 years, without causing any problems." "That's exactly the issue," Margaret replied coolly. "Old trees are unpredictable. Large branches can fall without warning. Roots can damage foundations and sewer lines. The liability exposure for the association is significant." I felt my stomach drop. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" "Have it inspected. If the arborist finds any safety concerns, which they likely will given the tree's age, you'll need to have it removed." "Removed?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "You want me to cut down a century-old tree because it might cause problems?" "I want you to follow the same rules everyone else follows," Margaret said, her tone suggesting the conversation was over. 30 days, Miss Patterson. The clock is ticking." I spent the next week researching arborists, calling every certified professional within 50 miles. What I learned made my heart sink further. Most of the reputable arborists I spoke with were honest about the situation. "Look," said Tom Martinez from Heritage Tree Care, "if your HOA wants that tree gone, they'll find a reason. I've seen it before. They'll point to minor issues that are completely normal for a tree that age, some dead branches, maybe a small cavity, surface root exposure, and claim they're safety hazards. Technically, every large tree poses some level of risk. The question is whether that risk is reasonable." "Is it reasonable?" I asked. Tom was quiet for a moment. "From what you're describing, probably. But that won't matter if your HOA has already made up their minds." I chose Tom anyway, hoping his reputation and thorough approach might work in my favor. He came out on a Tuesday afternoon, while Emma was at school, spending nearly 2 hours examining every inch of the tree. He checked the root system, measured the trunk, used some kind of sonic device to test for internal decay, and climbed up to inspect the canopy. His report was detailed and professional. The tree was in excellent health for its age, with solid structural integrity and no immediate safety concerns. He recommended removing 3 small dead branches and monitoring one area, where the bark had some minor damage, but overall gave it a clean bill of health. I submitted the report to the HOA with a sense of relief, thinking this would finally put the matter to rest. I was wrong. HOA made me cut down my 100-year-old oak tree. Big mistake. 4. Margaret's response came within 48 hours, this time delivered by hand and taped to my front door. The new letter was longer and more threatening. "Dear Miss Patterson, the arborist report you submitted has been reviewed by our Architectural Committee and independent consultant. While we acknowledge the tree appears stable at present, several concerning factors were identified. Presence of dead branches, indicating ongoing decline, minor bark damage, potential entry point for disease, and root system extending beyond property boundaries, possible infrastructure interference. Additionally, the tree's advanced age makes future catastrophic failure unpredictable and likely. The committee has voted unanimously to require removal within 60 days. Failure to comply will result in daily fines of $100, with the association reserving the right to have the tree Removed at your expense if necessary. My hands were shaking as I finished reading. They were going to take my tree, and there was nothing I could do about it. That evening, I sat Emma down to explain what was happening. She listened with that serious expression kids get when they sense the adult world is about to disappoint them again. "But why, Mommy?" she asked, tears starting to form. "The tree didn't do anything wrong." I didn't have an answer that would make sense to an 8-year-old. Hell, it didn't make sense to me either. The next few weeks were a blur of legal research and sleepless nights. I called lawyers, but most wouldn't touch HOA disputes for less than a $10,000 retainer. I reached out to neighbors, hoping to find allies, but most were polite and non-committal. A few admitted privately that they thought the tree removal was excessive, but nobody wanted to go up against Margaret and the board. The daily fine started exactly 60 days after the first notice. $100 a day, every day, added to my HOA dues. I watched my bank account drain while Emma asked daily if her swing was safe. Then came the harassment. Margaret seemed to drive by our house multiple times a day, sometimes stopping to take photographs. She'd note the exact time in a little notebook and document anything she could frame as a violation. A newspaper left on the front steps an hour too long, a recycling bin placed 6 inches too close to the street, a small weed growing through a crack in the driveway. Other board members joined in. I get citation notices for excessive noise when Emma played in the backyard, for unsightly outdoor furniture when I left a single patio chair on the deck, for unauthorized landscaping modifications when I planted flowers in my own flower bed. Each violation came with its own fine, its own threatening letter, its own deadline. The stress was eating me alive. I was losing weight, losing sleep, snapping at Emma over minor things because I was constantly on edge. My work was suffering because I couldn't concentrate. I felt like I was being watched, judged, persecuted in what was supposed to be my sanctuary. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in October. Emma and I were raking leaves under the oak tree, one of those perfect autumn moments where the setting sun filtered through the golden canopy and my daughter's laughter filled the air. She was jumping in the leaf piles, making up songs about her magic tree. When Margaret appeared at our back gate, "Miss Patterson," she called out, "I need to speak with you." I walked over, rake in hand, try to keep my voice calm. "What can I do for you, Margaret?" She gestured toward the tree. "The removal deadline was 3 weeks ago. You're now facing fines of over $2,000, and that number grows every day you delay." "I'm working on it." I lied, because I had no idea what else to say. Margaret's expression softened in a way that somehow felt more threatening than her usual sternness. "Sarah, I'm going to be frank with you. This tree needs to come down. You can do it voluntarily, or we can force the issue through legal action. Either way, it's happening." "Why?" The question burst out of me with months of frustration behind it. "Why this tree? Why my property? There are bigger trees, older trees, trees that actually overhang the street. Why mine?" Margaret glanced around, making sure we weren't overheard, then stepped closer. "Because I can," she said quietly. "Because you're new, you don't have allies, and you're not going to win this fight. I've been running this neighborhood. HOA made me cut down my 100-year-old oak tree. Big mistake. 6. For 15 years, and I don't intend to have my authority questioned by some divorced single mother who thinks rules don't apply to her." The mask had finally slipped. This wasn't about safety or regulations or community standards. This was about power, pure and simple. "Mommy," Emma's voice came from behind me, small and scared. "Is the mean lady going to hurt our tree?" Margaret looked at my daughter, then back at me. 60 more days, she said. "After that, we handle this ourselves." As she walked away, I realized this had become about more than just a tree. This was about whether I was going to let someone bully me out of my own home, my own life, my own family's legacy. That night, after Emma was asleep, I made a decision. I wasn't going down without a fight. I started my research the next morning, fueled by anger and desperation. If Margaret wanted to play hardball, I needed to understand the game better than she did. I'd been reactive up to this point, responding to their demands and deadlines. It was time to get proactive. First, I pulled every document I could find related to the HOA, the original covenants from 1962, all amendments and updates, meeting minutes going back 5 years, financial statements, architectural committee decisions, everything. What I found was fascinating and infuriating in equal measure. The tree height restriction had indeed been added in 2019, but the way it was implemented was questionable. The vote had happened during a December meeting when only 12 of the neighborhood's 47 homeowners were present. The meeting minutes showed no discussion of the change, no environmental impact consideration, no grandfather clause mentioned for existing trees. It had been rushed through with minimal notice and even less input. More interesting was what I found in the architectural committee records. Over the past 3 years, they'd approved several major tree removals, all of them healthy, mature specimens. But I also found multiple instances where certain homeowners' HOA made me cut down my 100-year-old oak tree. Big mistake. 7. All longtime residents, all friends of Margaret, had been granted variances for their own large trees. The Henderson family on Oak Street had a massive pine that dropped branches regularly and had damaged their neighbor's fence twice. Variance approved, no removal required. The Williamses on Maple Drive had an old elm with obvious signs of disease. Variance approved, monitoring recommended. The Kowalskis on Birch Lane had an oak almost as large as mine that had actually caused foundation issues for their neighbors. Variance approved, mitigation measures suggested. The pattern was clear. If Margaret liked you, your tree was fine. If she didn't, it had to go. But the real breakthrough came when I started digging into the HOA's finances. The management company they used, Thornfield Property Services, shared a name with our president. A little more research revealed that Margaret Thornfield and her husband Robert owned the company that managed our HOA. They were essentially paying themselves to run the neighborhood, collecting management fees and contractor referrals, while using their positions to harass homeowners who didn't fall in line. It got worse. I cross-referenced the tree removal orders with the contractor they recommended for the work. Thornfield Tree Services, another family business. They were making money on both ends, creating violations and then profiting from the solutions. I had them, but I needed more than just evidence of conflicts of interest. I needed leverage. So I started reaching out to other homeowners who'd been targeted over there years, not to get them to fight alongside me, but to document a pattern of harassment and selective enforcement. Mrs. Chun from Sycamore Street had been fined repeatedly for leaving her trash cans out too long, even though several other homeowners did the same without consequences. She'd eventually paid for expensive new cans with wheels that could be moved quickly, just to avoid the harassment. The Johnsons on Pine Street had been forced to repaint their entire house because the HOA claimed the color had faded beyond acceptable standards, even though it looked identical to when they'd moved in 5 years earlier. They'd spent $8,000 to avoid daily fines. Mark Stevens, a single father on Elm Street, had been cited for excessive vehicle noise because his older pickup truck was apparently too loud for the neighborhood standards. He'd been forced to buy a newer, quieter vehicle or face escalating fines. The pattern was always the same. Target someone without deep community ties. Create arbitrary violations. Impose escalating financial pressure. Force compliance. Through exhaustion and fear. But I also found something else in my research. Something that changed everything. While looking through the county records for the original neighborhood development, I discovered that my oak tree wasn't just old. It was historically significant. The original 1962 development plan had been designed around it, with the street layout specifically modified to preserve what the surveyor had noted as a magnificent specimen white oak, estimated age 40 years. The tree had been there before the neighborhood, before the roads, before any of the houses. It was the reason this particular plot had been designated as a larger lot. More importantly, I found a 1985 designation by the county's Historical Society, listing the tree as a heritage specimen, part of a program to protect historically and environmentally significant trees on private property. The designation came with legal protections that I wasn't sure the HOA could override. I called the county the next morning and spoke with Janet Morrison, the current head of the Historical Society. She was fascinated to hear from me. "Oh my goodness, the Elm Street oak," she said when I explained the situation. "I've been meaning to update our records on that tree. It's actually over 100 years old now, isn't it? That makes it one of the oldest documented trees in the county. The HOA is trying to force me to remove it," I explained. "They're saying it's a safety hazard." Janet was quiet for a long moment. "That's problematic. The heritage designation specifically prohibits removal except in cases of immediate danger to life or property. Have they provided evidence of such danger?" "HOA made me cut down my 100-year-old oak tree. Big mistake. 9. They had an arborist report that said it was healthy, but they rejected it and demanded removal anyway." "That's not how this works," Janet said firmly. "Can you meet me there this afternoon? I'd like to see the tree and review their demands. If they're trying to remove a heritage specimen without proper cause, the county will have something to say about it." For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope. Janet arrived that afternoon with a camera, measuring tape, and an official-looking clipboard. She spent an hour documenting the tree, taking photographs from every angle, measuring its circumference and estimating its canopy spread. Emma helped by holding the measuring tape and asking questions about how trees grow. "This is remarkable," Janet said as we stood under the canopy. "The health of this specimen is exceptional for its age. The structure is sound, the leaf coverage is dense and healthy, and I can see evidence of professional maintenance over the years. There's absolutely no justification for removal under the Heritage Protection Guidelines." "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now I file a formal objection to any removal permits and notify the HOA that they're dealing with a protected tree. If they want to pursue this, they'll need to prove immediate danger through an independent assessment, and even then, they'd need county approval for removal." Janet left me with copies of all the heritage designation documents and a letter present to the HOA. But she also gave me something more valuable, the contact information for other homeowners who'd successfully fought HOA overreach with the county's help. That evening, I started making calls. What I learned was that Margaret's little kingdom had been operating in a legal gray area for years, often exceeding their authority and ignoring county regulations when it suited them. Several homeowners had won appeals or lawsuits, but most had quietly settled or moved away rather than continue fighting. One name kept coming up: David Chun, Mrs. Chen's son, who happened to be a civil rights attorney specializing in housing discrimination and HOA abuse cases. He'd been following his mother's situation and was very interested in what I'd discovered about the Thornfields' financial conflicts of interest. "What you're describing sounds like a classic pattern," David told me during our phone call. "Use HOA authority to generate business for family companies, target vulnerable homeowners who can't fight back effectively, create a climate of fear to prevent organized resistance. I've seen it before. Can you help me?" I asked. "I can do better than that," David said. "I think you might be able to help a lot of people. Are you interested in going beyond just saving your tree?" I thought about Emma, about all the other families who'd been bullied and extorted, about the 100-year-old oak that had become a symbol of everything worth protecting. "Yes," I said. "I'm very interested." David worked fast. Within a week, he'd filed a formal complaint with the county about the HOA's attempted removal of a heritage tree without proper permits. He also submitted a request for a full audit of the HOA's management practices, citing potential conflicts of interest and selective enforcement patterns. But Margaret wasn't going to give up easily. 3 days after the county filing, I came home to find a crew from Thornfield Tree Services parked in front of my house. The crew chief, a burly man with Margaret's same cold eyes, clearly Robert Thornfield himself, was standing at my front door with an official-looking document. "Miss Patterson," he said as I got out of my car, "we're here to perform emergency tree removal as authorized by the HOA board. Please move your vehicle so we can access the backyard." My heart was racing, but I kept my voice steady. "What emergency?" He waved the paper. "High winds last night. Boards determined the tree poses immediate danger. We need to remove it today for safety reasons." It had been a perfectly calm night. Not even a breeze. "I'm going to need to see some permits," I said. "HOA made me cut down my 100-year-old oak tree. Big mistake." 11. Robert's expression darkened. "HOA doesn't need permits for emergency removals on member property. Check your covenants." "Actually," I said, pulling out the heritage designation documents Janet had given me, "they do need permits for this particular tree. It's protected by the county. Any removal requires approval from the Historical Society and the county planning office." Robert snatched the papers from my hand and read quickly, his face getting redder by the moment. "This is bullshit," he said finally. "Some fancy paperwork doesn't override legitimate safety concerns." "It literally does," I replied, "and I've already notified the county that you're here. I'd suggest you leave before you face criminal charges for attempting to destroy protected property." It was a bluff. I hadn't called anyone yet, but it worked. Robert stormed back to his truck, shouting something about lawyers and legal action. The crew packed up and left, but I knew this was just the beginning of an escalation. I called David immediately. "They tried to cut it down anyway?" David sounded shocked. "That's incredibly stupid on their part, and incredibly helpful for our case." "What do you mean?" "I mean they just demonstrated willful disregard for county regulations and attempted destruction of protected property. That's not just an HOA dispute anymore. That's a potential criminal matter." David was right. The county took the attempted removal very seriously. An inspector came out the next day, documented everything, and issued a formal cease and desist order to both the HOA and Thornfield Tree Services. Any further attempts to remove the tree without proper permits would result in criminal charges and significant fines. But Margaret still had one card to play, the nuclear option. 2 weeks later, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. They were initiating foreclosure proceedings on my property due to substantial unpaid fines and assessments. The total amount they claimed I owed was staggering, $8,750. HOA made me cut down my 100-year-old oak tree. Big mistake. 12. In tree removal fines, plus additional penalties for various other alleged violations, plus attorney fees, plus administrative costs. The letter gave me 30 days to pay in full or face seizure of my property. I stared at the letter in disbelief. They were trying to take my house over a tree. That night, I sat Emma down for another difficult conversation. She was old, enough to understand that we might have to move, but too young to understand why adults were being so cruel over something so simple. "I don't want to leave our tree, Mommy," she said, tears in her eyes. "It's the only one that knew Great-Grandma Rose." Her words broke my heart and steeled my resolve at the same time. This wasn't just about property rights or legal technicalities anymore. This was about family, heritage, and refusing to let bullies win. I called David that night and told him about the foreclosure threat. "Perfect," he said, which wasn't the response I'd expected. "Perfect?" I asked. "They're trying to take my house." "They're overplaying their hand," David explained. "Foreclosure for disputed fines is a nuclear option that courts scrutinize very carefully, and we now have enough evidence to file a federal lawsuit under the Fair Housing Act for selective enforcement, plus state charges for the financial conflicts of interest. We can get an injunction to stop the foreclosure and probably force a complete audit of their practices. Will it work? Sarah, David said. By the time we're done, they're going to wish they'd never heard your name. David filed our countersuit 3 days before the foreclosure deadline. It was comprehensive and devastating. Federal civil rights violations, breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, conspiracy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of state regulations governing HOA management companies. The evidence we gathered painted a picture of systematic abuse, the selective enforcement patterns, the financial conflicts of interest, the attempted destruction of protected property, the retaliatory escalation. It was all there in black and white. More importantly, word of the lawsuit spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Suddenly, other homeowners who'd been quietly suffering under Margaret's regime found their courage. Mrs. Chin agreed to testify about her harassment. The Johnsons provided evidence of the forced repainting. Mark Stevens documented his vehicle citations. A dozen other families came forward with their own stories of arbitrary fines and selective enforcement. The county audit revealed even more problems. Thornfield Property Services had been overcharging the HOA for management fees, steering contracts to family members, and improperly using HOA funds for personal expenses. The tree removal campaign was just one part of a larger pattern of corruption and abuse. Margaret tried to fight back, hiring an expensive attorney and claiming that she was just enforcing legitimate community standards. But her position became untenable when the County Historical Society filed their own lawsuit seeking damages for the attempted destruction of a heritage tree. The beginning of the end came during a mandatory mediation session in February. Margaret, Robert, their attorney, David, and I sat around a conference table while a court-appointed mediator tried to find a resolution. Margaret's attorney opened with an aggressive defense of the HOA's authority to enforce community standards. But when David presented our evidence, the selective enforcement patterns, the financial conflicts, the heritage tree protections, the attempted illegal removal, the mood in the room shifted dramatically. Your clients, David said calmly, have been operating what amounts to a protection racket. Pay the fines, use our contractors, don't question our authority, or we'll make your life miserable and potentially take your home. That's not community management, that's extortion. The mediator, a retired judge named Harrison, reviewed our evidence for what felt like hours. Finally, he looked up at Margaret's attorney. Counselor, I'm going to be frank with you. Your clients are facing potential criminal charges, significant civil liability, and almost certain removal from HOA leadership. The evidence of corruption here is overwhelming. I'd strongly advise. HOA made me cut down my 100-year-old oak tree. Big mistake. 14. You to consider a settlement that includes their resignation and financial restitution. Margaret's face went through several color changes during this speech. She'd gone from arrogant confidence to pale shock in the span of a few hours. This is ridiculous, she finally said. We were protecting property values and maintaining community standards. Everything we did was within our authority as an HOA board. Ma'am, Judge Harrison replied, you tried to steal this woman's house over a tree that your own expert said was healthy, then attempted to destroy county-protected property when she fought back. That's not community management. That's what we call abuse of process and potentially criminal behavior. The settlement negotiations took 3 more hours. In the end, Margaret and Robert agreed to immediately resign from all HOA positions, terminate their management contract, and transfer HOA management to an independent company. Pay $25,000 in damages to me and another $15,000 to the HOA for misappropriated funds. Drop all fines and violations against my property. Publicly apologize to the community for their misconduct. Accept a permanent ban from serving in any HOA leadership capacity. More importantly, the new HOA board, elected in an emergency meeting where nearly every homeowner participated, voted to repeal the arbitrary tree height restriction, and establish new policies protecting mature trees and preventing selective enforcement. Spring came early that year, and I'll never forget the moment when the oak tree began to bloom again. Emma and I were sitting under it on her swing, the same swing that had hung from that branch for 4 generations, when the first tiny green buds appeared on the massive branches above us. HOA made me cut down my 100-year-old oak tree. Big mistake. 15. Look, Mommy, Emma said, pointing up at the new growth. The tree is happy we saved it. She was right. The tree did seem happy, and so were we. The stress and fear that had dominated our lives for months were finally gone, replaced by a sense of peace and community that I'd never experienced before. The lawsuit and subsequent media attention had brought the neighborhood together in unexpected ways. Other residents who'd felt isolated and powerless under Margaret's regime discovered they weren't alone. We started having regular community gatherings, not formal HOA meetings, but actual social events where neighbors could get to know each other. Mrs. Chun and I became close friends, bonding over our shared experience of fighting back against bullies. The Johnsons invited us over for barbecues where Emma played with their grandchildren under the very tree that had nearly cost us everything. Mark Stevens became our unofficial neighborhood handyman, helping elderly residents with home repairs and refusing payment because we look out for each other here. The new HOA board, led by a retired teacher named Bob Martinez, focused on actual community building rather than arbitrary rule enforcement. They organized block parties, coordinated neighborhood cleanups, and established a fund to help homeowners maintain and protect the mature trees that made our streets so beautiful. My oak tree became something of a neighborhood landmark. The County Historical Society installed a small plaque near its base identifying it as a century-old heritage specimen and recognizing its role in the community's history. Emma loved reading the plaque to visitors and explaining how she'd helped save the family tree. David Chen's investigation into the Thornfield's practices led to broader reforms in how HOAs are regulated in our county. New oversight requirements were put in place to prevent management companies from operating without independent oversight, and homeowners gained new rights to appeal arbitrary fines and violations. But the most important change was personal. Fighting for that tree taught me that sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when you're scared, even when HOA made me cut down my 100-year-old oak tree. Big mistake. 16. You feel powerless, even when the odds seem stacked against you. Emma learned that lesson too, watching her mother refuse to back down in the face of intimidation and threats. The tree that had connected me to 4 generations of my family became the symbol of something new. The idea that home isn't just a place you live, but a place worth fighting for. That community isn't about following arbitrary rules, but about looking out for each other. That sometimes the most important victories come not from compromise or backing down, but from standing firm and saying, "No, this isn't right." Emma is 10 now, and she still spends most summer afternoons on her swing under the oak tree. Sometimes her friends come over, and I watch them playing the same games my grandmother played, climbing the same branches, carving their initials in bark that has witnessed a century of growth and change. The tree has continued to thrive, adding new rings each year, its canopy spreading wider and its trunk growing thicker. Professional arborists now use it as an example in their training programs, showing how proper care and protection can help urban trees survive and flourish for generations. Margaret and Robert Thornfield moved out of the neighborhood 6 months after the settlement. I heard they tried to start a property management company in another county, but word of their practices had spread. Their reputation followed them. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the fight, if all the stress and legal battles were worth it for just a tree. But they're missing the point. It was never just about the tree. It was about standing up to people who abuse their power, protecting something valuable for future generations, and refusing to be bullied out of your own home. That oak tree taught me that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. It taught Emma that bullies only win when good people do nothing. And it taught our whole neighborhood that when we stand together, we're stronger than any HOA president or arbitrary rule or threatening letter. Every morning now, I have my coffee on the back deck, looking up at that magnificent canopy and remembering what we almost lost. Every evening I watch Emma play under those same branches and think about the children who might play there 50 years from now, long after Emma has children of her own. The tree stands as a testament to the idea that some things are bigger than rules and regulations and property values. Some things connect us to the past and anchor us to the future. Some things are worth fighting for, no matter how long the fight takes or how difficult it becomes. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you win. The oak tree that almost cost me everything became the thing that taught me the most important lesson of my life. Never let anyone convince you that their power matters more than what's right. Never let fear stop you from protecting what you love. And never underestimate the strength that comes from knowing you're fighting for something bigger than yourself. Emma's swing still hangs from that same branch, swaying gently in the breeze. The tree that witnessed 4 generations of my family will witness many more, protected now by law and by a community that learned the value of standing together. Some fights are worth having. Some trees are worth saving. Some homes are worth defending. And sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys win.